All right, it's 5:45. So this being the very first meeting of the Finance Committee, this is awesome. Looking forward to the next 2 years of working together. The first item on the agenda is select a chairperson and a vice chairperson for the 2020 to 2022 term. So I think, what do they call it? A nomination, yeah. So we'd be looking for a nomination for chairperson of the committee.
Mary Ann?
Yeah.
I'd like to nominate Lisa Rasmussen.
And Martin says his hand
Okay. Michael Martin.
I also was going to nominate Lisa, so I guess I'll second that nomination.
All right. Are there any other nominations? We have one nomination for Lisa Rasmussen. Any other nominations? Okay.
I will nominate Dawn.
Okay, we have a second nomination for Dawn Herbst. Do we have a second on that nomination? Any seconds? Oh, are you willing to accept that nomination?
I thank Deb very much, but I would have to decline.
Okay. Any other nominations?
I would like to nominate Mr. Martins.
Okay, we have a nomination for Michael Martins. Mr. Martins, are you willing to accept that responsibility?
Nope, he's muted.
Yes, I'll accept that responsibility.
Okay. Okay, do we have a second for Michael Martins? A second for the nomination of Michael Martins? Do we need a second for a nomination, Ann? Okay.
Usually we take them, but usually we do.
Okay, so it doesn't look like we're getting a second nomination for Michael Martins. So now we have one nomination for Lisa Rasmussen. Are we ready to vote?
So in ED, we did not take a vote because there was only one
Oh,
nomination, so
okay.
it's unanimous. I don't know if that's.
Okay. So we can either vote or just assume, since there's no other nomination, that Lisa Rasmussen is the chair. I think we should vote. Let's just take a vote. All those in favor of Lisa Rasmussen as chair, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay. Passes unanimously. So now we're ready for vice chair nomination. Or does the chairman now take it over? Perfect. I have it on. Oh, the master.
There you go.
Thank you. With that, we'll start, accept nominations for vice chair of the Finance Committee. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Don't everyone volunteer at once. Ms. Ryan?
I nominate Mr. Martins.
Okay, we have a nomination for Michael Martins as the vice chair. Is there a second for Mike's nomination?
I would second that.
Ms. Second for Ms. Watson. Additional nominations for vice chair of finance? One more time, additional nominations. If not, we'll close nominations for vice chair. And we can either cast a unanimous ballot for Mr. Martins, or we can vote. I guess since we voted on the chair, let's vote. All members in favor of Mike Martins as vice chair signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Mike Martins is then recognized as the vice chairman for the next term. Item number 2 on our agenda is to establish a regular meeting date and time for the 2020 to the 2022 term. Typically, this committee has been meeting the second and fourth Tuesday at 5:15, sometimes a little later if we have a short agenda, so that we can transact our business on a timely schedule. And we have enough business in the Finance Committee that this committee does often require 2 meetings a month. There are times where we'll only confine that to 1, but with the flow of work that we normally have, 2 makes sense. That said, this committee also meets as needed for special projects and 5 or 6 nights, sometimes consecutively, for its budget process in the fall. So those are all special meetings, but does anyone have a feeling about the second and fourth Tuesday as a routine meeting date? Are we good with that time? Do we want to stay with?
Lisa, I would just say that for the council, what did we decide? I can't remember for sure. I've got a-
Second and fourth
I've
at
got a
six.
14-year-old pug at home.
Second and fourth Tuesday also at 6:30. So,
Okay.
No, 5:15.
5:15? Okay,
For finance.
I think we should,
Yeah, I'm good with that.
okay.
yeah, I think we should keep that also because then it follows precedes the council meeting.
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, if we can agree by consensus that we want to keep that time, the second and fourth Tuesday at 5:15. And if we have a short agenda, we will adjust that time accordingly. If it's real short, sometimes we'll meet at 6 o'clock, just so we don't have an hour-long gap between the 2 Tuesday night meetings. And we can work with that and make sure the members get communication about that. So thank you for that. Item number 3 on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our previous 2 meetings, 3/24 of 2020 and 4/14 of 2020, copies of which were in the packets. Any modifications or adjustments needed to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve both sets of minutes. Motion by Herbst, is there a second?
Second by Martins.
Second by Martins. Discussion or questions? Go ahead, Ms. Ryan.
Since I did not attend those meetings, I will abstain from this vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, with no further discussion, then I think what we'll do, since we have members attending in WebEx, we will call the roll on these votes where there are items of substance. So we'll record Deb Ryan as an abstention, and then from that point, Watson? Martins?
Aye.
Herbst? I'll vote aye as well. So that minutes are approved 4-0 with 1 abstention. Item number 4 is discussion and possible action regarding a budget modification for the CAMA assessment software. This item will come to us, and we've got the city assessor with us, and we've also got our IT staff with us. We need to, I guess, talk about this CAMA assessment software. As you know, based on some of the background in the packets, we are on our 3rd go-round trying to buy assessment software for our assessment department so that they have a, I would say, up-to-date and functional system to do the job that they do. We've had 2 failed vendors attempt this process. The first one, I think, was, I would say, a worse failure because it resulted in, I guess I would say a larger financial loss than the second one. The second go-around, we had some benchmarks in the proposal where if there were no benchmarks, there was no payment. And so with that, we have some money left from the second allocation. But with the proposal that we were back out to RFP again, with the proposal we have before us, the funds that we have left from the second iteration of the assessment software purchase, again, isn't enough money. And so you see in your packets, there's more money needed. And, given the fact that we have both new members on our council and new members on our committee, I guess I would like Jerry and Rick to come up and just walk us through a little bit where we are at now and, what level of confidence they have with the proposed Patriot product. And then I also would like to talk to them a little bit about a software program called Market Drive that we received a proposal from early on. We chose not to purchase it, but it was dramatically cheaper. And I think some of the concerns that we had with that product in the first go-round have been resolved. Their ability to archive drawings and sketches, I believe, has changed, and they're now serving more municipalities in Wisconsin. Now, they were reluctant to bid on this last go-round, but we need to have a discussion about, and maybe we don't know enough yet to act tonight on this, but I think we need to have a discussion around this issue to get our arms around it, and then we have to decide, do we want this recommended product, or do we want to extend the timeline? And is there an option for us to get at that market drive product? Or has that bridge been, I guess I would say decimated to the point where we cannot buy the market drive product even if we wanted to? And if that's the case, then we're left with some limited choices. So I guess Rick and Jerry, if you guys would come up and talk with us a little bit and kind of walk us through where we're at with this.
Yes,
It is, and that's fine. I mean, we've all been at this for 4 years, but our new members haven't, and, when we get to the third attempt, we get a little heartburn about the fact that we still don't have software, so, it's not your fault, but we still don't have software, so help us understand.
okay, I'll start off, Jerry.
Try to get a little distance, so.
So with the failure of DevNet, part of this process moving forward after it was approved to go with the RFP process was to establish a RFP that we learned from the mistakes from the other two providers. And within our RFP, we had the first time had offered, I guess, the providers 362 questions that they had to answer in regards to the functionality of their system, in regards to how it works with the Department of Revenue, how they're going to implement it, and any issues and any future costs that we may see if we selected them. And based on the criteria of, before we put the RFP out, we did contact the 3 providers in the state of Wisconsin, Market Drive, Patriot Technologies, and Tyler. All 3 were aware of the RFP coming out. We let them know that when we're going to release it, and also when questions, if they would have any, when they would be posted on the RFP site. With that, Market Drive did contact Jerry. Jerry can speak to that. 2 weeks into the RFP process, and elected not to apply or fill out an RFP for this time around. So the 2 providers that we did get an RFP from was Tyler Technologies and Patriot, and it was reviewed by my staff and myself, and reviewed by the IT department, Julie Hendricks and Petty. And came up to an unanimous decision that we should go with Patriot. Patriot also is the owner of our current software, so the transition in regards to how our system works, this old system works, they understand it. So I think it's going to be a seamless process into getting, our CAMA system up and running. In addition, they just did the city of Milwaukee in 1 year. So the city of Milwaukee is very, very huge. They had no issues in regards to implementing that software for the city of Milwaukee.
Thank you for that. Jerry?
Do you want me to cover the market drive?
Yeah, because I know that you guys had some dialogue with Market Drive during the RFP process, and I'm just curious if there's just no way. I mean, that product was substantially less, and they have so many customers in Wisconsin, and our main concern with it was the sketch storage, basically, and we thought that was resolved. Where did you guys leave off with Market Drive? If it's not an option, I get it, but.
Sure. So Market Drive is one we looked at the first 2 times, and I don't think it's any secret. That was the recommendation that I had the first 2 times. There was plenty of meetings on those over the last 6 or 7 years. But this time, Market Drive had contacted me after we talked about buying a new product and said that they had bid on the first 2, and they were not interested in responding to the RFP. They did send us their response from the second RFP and said we'd still support this general cost. And then when this RFP came out, that then maybe Rick, was that maybe like 2 or 3 weeks later? Something like that. About 2 weeks later, they came back and then said, we're not going to respond to the RFP because we're uncomfortable making a final fixed cost on the data conversion. So you have 2 choices in front of you. The easiest path is to pick between the 2 that did the RFP response, and that's Patriot and Tyler. I feel a lot better about Patriot than I did about the VGSI and DevNet. They've done a couple of successful things lately. I think the team made between those 2. I'm pretty comfortable that everybody's got the best choice. That it's Patriot over Tyler between those two. The other path that you talked about would be more complicated. That's not consistent with your past practices on doing these RFPs. You'd have to throw out those two RFP responses, say you didn't have enough money for them, and you'd have to go work with Ann and others to go through your purchasing process to make sure that, to figure out a way to do that. You'd probably have to do it as sole source or redo the RFP. I'm not sure what you'd have to do. The big picture costs are, this is about 180,000, 179,000?
190.
100 and, seems like it was, okay. Just under 200,000, how about that? It's in his packet. And then I think the annual maintenance on Patriot is 18,000. Market Drive's last proposal that they gave us, and again, we can't just buy off that because they didn't respond to the RFP, was 112,000 and $11,000 in annual maintenance. Maybe it was 12, it was 11.5, I think. That sound right? So that's kind of your two choices. You'd have to kind of throw out the RFP response and go down, if you wanted to try Market Drive. If you want to move forward relatively rapidly, Marianne and I figured out a way to fund the shortfall. And the main kind of method of doing that is one of the products that we planned to buy this year was special assessment software. We decommissioned our land record system and went to a product called Transcendent, which the county ended up buying 100% of the cost for that. In the old system we had written ourselves, we had written in special assessment software ourselves. So we had looked around a little bit and said, geez, there's not a lot of special assessment software out there, but we would want to not lose the functionality we had before, which was it was fairly automated special assessments. And special assessments, for those that are new to the council, is if they redo a road and they have to put curb and gutter in, each of the houses along the road gets a fee for sidewalk replacement and curb and gutter, and that's called a special assessment, and it's taxed to the homeowner of that. It's not the whole cost of the road, it's a portion of the road. So we had requested money to do that, but when we went and looked at it, we really just didn't find anything that was a good fit, and we decided to write it ourselves. So we had planned to spend almost $90,000 on that product, and one of our programmers is doing it themselves. So we do have the money that helped move some money around. Mary Ann and I sat down and figured out, okay, what are the 5-6 projects that we got to do with this pot of money? And I think we came up with that there was $32,000 that we'd need to do to come up with, and we proposed, I think it's in the packet, we proposed that we'd take that out of a network account.
Sure.
So you have two different things.
the
It's
only
the
thing that gives-
financial side and the software decision.
The only thing that gives me pause, I guess, as you explain that, is that if we were going to go with a different process that's basically non-conventional, the fact that Market Drive was unwilling to commit to a finite price on data conversion, that's where the other vendors failed. Because we had this inordinately large amount of data, and as they were trying to convert and test and get files to match, that's where they ended up with all these delays and new work tickets, and they couldn't get stuff to match and nothing tied out properly. And so I just wonder if in those first couple proposals, they said, oh, we can do this in 5 months, and, if it doesn't work, your money back. Maybe once they got a sample or a test of what that job all entailed, do you think maybe they thought better of it and said, oh, this Wausau thing, this is maybe more than we can guarantee? Maybe it's not as, I guess,
I just want to
my
be clear, are
question
you
is
talking
it
about
possible it's-
Market Drive making that
Yes.
judgment or
Yes.
someone else? They never, Market Drive didn't take any detailed work on our data analysis, the data conversion.
not even a data sample for the conversion process?
Not that
I thought they
I'm
had
aware
some
of.
test data.
Did they get a small sample?
I think they got a small sample. Got to ask Patty.
And that's what
Okay.
made me wonder, because
I
if the
can't
test
answer that,
sample
Brett.
was already cumbersome, maybe
We
that's
might have done
why.
it. It's true that a big part of the failure of the first two projects was data conversion, and there's no question. But that's not all.
I just hate to go to a non-conventional process to find out that we are running into the exact same challenges with a proven vendor than,
Yeah. Michael Martin has his hand up.
oh, okay, Mike, go ahead.
Come back up in case you have another question for you.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair. And, yeah, one of the concerns I have is that, particularly if Market Drive decided to refuse the RFP, that makes me very concerned that, and I think it's more than just a case of, them not winning the proposal the first 2 rounds and taking a pass on it this time. I think they feel that there might be something either architecturally or institutionally problematic with the data conversion. But what I see as a positive, though, is that if Patriot is the current owner of our existing CAMA system, wouldn't they have sort of an inside track on and knowledge of the architecture of our existing system, and would be able to leverage some of that ability in successfully converting our data? And I know we do have a lot of data. You know, when we start talking about the sketches and all the ancillary products, that's what really has caused these other companies grief. So I would feel more comfortable in a software that you know, or a vendor that does have a little bit of that inside knowledge on the inner workings of the application.
I think they have some inside knowledge, but they, just to be clear, really what they did was they bought that product that was dead, so they bought the customer base from it, and then they did some of the data conversions on it. And on balance on that, Market Drive has also converted HTE data, so there, I don't know that that provides them a big edge over Market Drive, but it's a, if it was true that they had taken an old database and converted it, then absolutely, you're right on that you'd want to partner with the company that's taken this old database. But really, everybody, the old product that we have running on our mid-range server is that was basically decommissioned. But I'm pretty comfortable that both Patriot and Market Drive have done those data conversions from HT before. The trick is that we have done a fair amount of customization of use of that data, and that's what we really found out. What, Lisa, what you're referring to is when we gave those data sets to DevNet most recently, there was a lot of challenge working with the data. They're saying, oh, we didn't know you were using that field or using it that way. I guess you could maybe speak to the challenges we had when DevNet did it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Some of the challenges that we had when DevNet did a lot of things was because in the city, we have captured a lot of information that is not standard, okay? To answer your question too, Lisa, is that Market Drive is set up like the property assessment manual. Don't deviate from it, okay? So if you wanted to pick up different things and value different items, you know, because you can find that data out of Marshall and Swift or other sources, you can't do it. It's not, you're not able to make your system better. It's this way or that's it.
So
okay?
one size fits all.
One size fits all. If you have that
Okay.
data, it's going to be gone. Okay, sorry. So with DevNet, they promised us that, hey, you guys have this data. It may not follow suit with the Department of Revenue, but we can add it, okay? And they're just having difficulties in regards to how much data there is, okay? I mean, you got to understand that, you know, you have a spreadsheet and everything that you keep from, story height to fuel, what type of fueling, does the house, the furnace, fireplaces, bedroom count, bath count, fixture count, remodeled or not remodeled, bathroom, kitchens. I mean, there's a lot of criteria, a lot of data, and they just failed in finding out where to place it. A nice thing is with either Tyler or Patriot, I mean, they made their system so customers can expand beyond what the Department of Revenue basic, it's just a basic. The DOR, what they want from us is basic. We've gone beyond that 25 years ago in the city of Wausau. We don't collect just basic information anymore, so.
Well, and that has led to more accurate assessments for us and for Schofield both that you're doing on a contract basis. So I totally get that. I think, what has always, I guess, given me heartburn is that I always wanted and I still want the best possible product we can get for you guys to work effectively. And, what I saw with the last batch of vendors is that all of you invested so much time and effort into trying to give them what they needed to give us what we needed, that we ended up with a whole bunch of wasted time and, this last one, a little wasted money. So at the end, but yet some of the components of the process we went through with that last one are useful for this one going
Sure.
forward. So I guess I won't say the
What-
word waste, but that's what I'm looking for still is, nobody has a crystal ball. So, a year from now, are we going to find out that this vendor has also been bought out or gone under, and here we sit again in the exact same pool? And yeah, I want us to take every possible precaution to avoid that, because we can't have a fourth fail, I guess, is where I feel.
Agree. I agree. And one other thing, too, with our data is we have a sales snapshot file. So anytime a property sells, we capture exactly what that record was at the time it sold. I mean, there's not a lot of camera system softwares out there that actually call it a snapshot, a sales snapshot file that has the sketch, has every attribute that property has the assessment, and has everything on it, and it's captured in time and how it existed. There's not a lot of providers out there that have that. And Patriot and Tyler are one of them that do have that ability to have a sales snapshot file. DevNet tried to create it, and they failed at trying to create it. They didn't know because it's multiple records. You think about, you have one main assessment record for the property that's getting taxed, and then that property sells 10 times. You have 10 sales snapshot files of that property. And next thing you know is what they were doing is taking a sales snapshot file and say that property had one bathroom and no AC, and then, 10 years ago and today, it has 3 bathrooms, AC, and a fireplace. Well, they didn't know enough to look at the data to say, hey, what is the real data, not the sales snapshot? And that's why a lot of that information failed when they tried to convert it.
So here's where this item, I think, is important for us to make some kind of a decision on as far as what direction we want to go. Because we've waited so long, I mean, we're using the old product, and the old product hasn't failed yet. But if the old product failed, my assumption is that this is so far out of maintenance, this CAMA product, that if it fails, we have very limited options with what we're going to do. I mean, we're going to have to move forward, right? We're still paying for maintenance on that, or no?
Should probably address that. The software that we have now only runs on Windows 7. Windows 7 is out of support. It's been for a couple of months. So just in order to do anything, let's say Patriot, let's say we're signing a contract with Patriot and they're totally successful, they deliver it in 9 months like they said, that's still requiring us to run Windows 7
Way longer than we should be.
For 9 months, and it's already been out of support for 2 months.
That-
In addition,
Yeah.
it's the last thing left on the mid-range environment that we have. And so by the end of the second quarter, the county will no longer be helping pay the lease on the mid-range server. We have it in the cloud. It's $25,000 a year. So that will transition over to a fully city cost, because you guys will be the only ones with software on that anymore.
So if we wait too long, waiting for some better deal or some cheaper product,
Please don't wait too long.
well, that's my question, is we could end up actually spending more money than we would have if we had just pulled the trigger and make the decision soon. And so, committee members, I guess I want to know how you feel on this. Do you feel that you're equipped to make a decision based on what you've heard here and what you've got in the packets, or do you need more? Sarah, did you have your hand up? Go, Sarah, and then Deb. Oh, okay, Deb, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that as part of this assessment, I have worked at other places where we used DBase back in the 90s, and then decided to go to a new database, and it ended up a contractor we wanted to do for tracking our information didn't really know DBase, and so we ended up hiring a newer contractor that did Access, and that worked out fine. I know things have changed quite a bit over the years, and my ex-husband got his degree at the Tech, and he was hired, since he first learned how to DBase, he did the conversion of Wausau Insurance to Liberty Mutual, and he did it in under 9 months, just him. So it's a question of being able to have the right person that understands the software and how to convert it. And there's a lot of talented other students at the Tech as well. But you're right, you need to have this capacity of planning on additional data spots in case that things need to change, and so that it's not as permanent one way or the other. But I guess one of the other questions I have is how much have you talked to other municipalities and other people that have used the system? is there some type of way that you could maybe collaborate with other municipalities to understand what's available, how it's working, how it went through the conversion process, so that you would know? Why I'm saying is, back in the 80s, I worked for the Green Bay Technical College, and we had seven colleges as a consortium working on the same software package in order to use their IT staff. And I would think a lot of the municipalities around Wisconsin would have similar needs to what we have. And so is there something we can do that would reduce the cost, gain that knowledge, and in helping, and then you know that you're in a good spot? I guess I do worry, though, with the way the economy is, we don't know how big this company is, there are enough of their details, that maybe by the end of the year, they may not survive. So I guess I would like to see more feedback from other municipalities and see if there's a way that you could work out some type of mutual agreement in helping with the conversion, so it's done sooner than later.
I don't think anyone else in Wisconsin is running the HTE software anymore because everyone else is converted off of it, so that's not really an option. But I can tell you, if you were to tell us to do Patriot, all that's in front of you tonight is a funding discussion. We would still be negotiating a contract with them that would have payments in it tied to deliverables. And to get at what Councilperson Ryan is saying, we could add to that and do follow-up with those that are using Patriot, the cities that have recently converted over it. You're gonna have to help me, Rick, I can't remember. I know they mentioned, we asked them when was the last one that did an HD conversion on, and I don't remember that off the top of my head, but we could certainly provide that. I guess I'm just clarifying, this, you guys approving any financial transfer wouldn't necessarily be approving us to buy Patriot tonight. We still have other work we have to do, which is negotiating the contract.
Mary Ann has a comment. Go ahead, Mary Ann.
Michael Martin has his hand
Oh,
up.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'd like to circle back a little bit more. You mentioned that Patriot just converted over and implemented their system into the city of Milwaukee. Do you have a feel, what was Milwaukee using prior to Patriot? And do you have a feeling of the complexity of their data set? Is it, I'm not going to say it's like ours.
He's asking you a question.
It's similar to ours, worse, or easier? Would there be a parallel there between what Patriot did with the city of Milwaukee and what they could do for us?
Sure. When I talked to the City of Milwaukee assessor, they have 3 different systems that they wanted converted. A lot of their stuff was homegrown from many, many, many years. And so you had to have staff and resources in regards to, implementing the conversion between 3 different sets of softwares that they created themselves. They also were successful with the Deanne in Appleton. She has also Patriot. She's with Patriot now for, I think, 5 years. So when I did talk with Steve Miner in Milwaukee, he was very happy with the progress of how Patriot and how quickly they had converted their data. And one thing that he said that was very good is that, City of Milwaukee does yearly revals. So when they cut the line and said, this is it, here's our software, our data, but we need to do a reval, like in 9 months, they had it ready for them to do the reval. So, and that was pretty good.
Rick, do you remember who the last HT conversion was for them? I think they told us that film, but
I don't recall, no.
it wasn't one of those.
No, I don't think so either.
Through the process, I know we've had a lot of coordination, or at least feedback from other municipalities, because when we were trying to pick Vision and when we were trying to pick DevNet, we were trying to find other people who use that as well. We also found that a lot of small municipalities use contract assessors, where they'll hire themselves out independently to assess for smaller communities, because they don't employ an assessor, they just have a traveling assessor that comes and helps them take care of it. Most of them are on Market Drive because they need that cookie cutter, one size fits all, because they work in so many cities or towns, that a uniform set of software makes sense for them. That may be why they have so many clients. But, you know, separate from that, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth with other municipalities. Is there more research to be done, or are we, I mean, I get that we're not going to finalize the purchase yet tonight, but if we release the funds, we negotiate the contract, the next step is to move that contract forward and buy that product. So, you know, what comfort level do we have? You know, thankfully you found the money. I mean, we have the funds available. We don't need to go to, at first, we thought this next attempt was going to be expensive enough that we were going to need a whole new CIP for 2021. And thankfully, it's not that expensive. But are we comfortable as a finance committee to send them forward with this adjustment of money we already have to get them underway with this negotiation, with the understanding that if there's no benchmarks and deliverables in the contract, we certainly don't want it signed?
One thing I'd like to
ahead.
add too, Lisa, is that prior to us doing the RFP, we did invite Market Drive, Tyler, and Patriot all to give us demonstrations. They spent myself and IT's time at least over a half a day doing a demo
Okay.
prior to us releasing the RFP. They knew the RFP was coming, but they didn't know when. And so we had all these demos done, and they're all done within a week and a half of each other to see what their product does, you know, how, you know, we had lots and lots of questions because we just got out of the failure of DevNet. So we knew what to ask, the prying questions, what to ask, you know, and to find us the right direction that we needed to go with our software before even we made that selection.
Okay, Mary Ann?
Michael Martin has another.
Oh, I'm
his
sorry.
hand
Go
up
ahead,
again.
Michael. Okay. Michael Martins, and then we'll recognize the city attorney.
Okay, yeah, I think I forgot to put my hand down, but I guess I'm feeling comfortable that we can move ahead with this, with Patriot. It feels, I got a general feeling that the assessment department is comfortable with it, and CCIT is comfortable with it, so that's, and if they were able to handle whatever kind of homegrown system the city of Milwaukee had running, that gives me a certain level of comfort too.
Okay, thank you. Let's recognize the city attorney and then Sarah.
I just wanted to quick point out to everybody that the resolution we prepared for your finance committee consideration does have two therefore be it resolved paragraphs. So because of the quick timing on this and us needing to move this forward for Rick, the procurement policy says that once a matter is budgeted for, it doesn't require council approval. But being a new council, we figured you'd wonder why you hadn't seen the contract or negotiated with anybody. So in addition to Mary Ann preparing the resolution to approve the budget modification, I was the one that asked her to add the last paragraph directing and authorizing a contract be executed between the city and Patriot so that we could move it forward. Otherwise, you'd approve the budget modification tonight, and then if you directed the contract come back, he'd be waiting another month, or you wouldn't see it at all, and then you'd wonder what happened to it, and we'd say, well, we didn't have to bring it back to you, and you didn't tell us to bring it back. So I just want to point out that that is in there so that if you want to modify it, or you don't want to include that in your motion tonight, then you can do whatever you'd like, but it was in the interest of time that we included both.
Sure. I guess I am of the mind that, given the fact that we've had the couple crashes and burns that we've had, I am confident that you guys would certainly not want to tread down that path again, and that if there were warning lights going off, that you'd be the first people to not execute the contract and alert us to the fact that some backpedaling needs to happen. So, I mean, I do have confidence in that. Sarah, go ahead with your comments.
I guess I did a brief search on Patriot Properties, and it seems like they've been around for quite a while, 1985. And have you heard of any other large projects besides Milwaukee that they've completed?
I think didn't we have it listed in yours, the cities, I think they have 5 cities in Wisconsin?
Yeah, they had Racine.
I think they have 5 cities in Wisconsin. I think so. Here's the reality of software vendors. They buy each other and kill each other off all the time. It's just a part of the industry that I'm a part of, which is unfortunate. But I can't tell you that Market Drive or Patriot or Tyler isn't going to get bought or buy someone tomorrow. I can tell you when we bought the law enforcement software, in in the course of selecting that software, we had narrowed it down to 3 vendors. In the narrow window of time between the time we'd narrowed it down to 3 and signed the contract, all 3 of them got bought or sold, just in a narrow window like that. So that industry happens all the time. And when they buy other companies, they typically buy other companies that are in the same market as them in order to kill their product. So it's a crappy message, but that's the reality of that business. Buying software is risky. We could buy Patriot, and Tyler could buy Patriot a week after we sign the contract. They'd of course say, we'll deliver the project, but we'll like to get you over to another one. So that's just the reality of buying software, is you have risks with this industry. I wouldn't consider any of these 3 any less risk. Market Drive and Patriot have been around a long time. I think they're both privately held. Tyler's a little bit bigger company, but that's not the product that we have in front of us anyways.
Okay. All right. With that, I guess I was sensing some comfort level on the part of some of us to move this item forward. Is there a motion from the Finance Committee to approve this item and move the contract forward to get the process started? Do we have a motion?
This is Martin, so move.
Okay, we have a motion from Martins. Is there a second? Second by Ryan. Further discussion or questions? Seeing none, then we'll call the roll for the vote. Ryan?
Aye.
Watson? Martins?
Aye.
Herbst? I'll vote aye as well. That item passes unanimously. Thank you all for taking time to help us get up to speed and understand where we've been, because it's been a really long road, so.
Yeah, I would just add to the council, Rick and I, before we bring to Ann the contract, we can certainly make another couple of calls with their customer base of the ones that they've recently converted.
Okay.
And we'll make sure that the payment schedule has got some
Benchmarks?
benchmarks in it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. With that, item number 5 is discussion and possible action regarding a budget modification for the Great Lakes Cheese Facility demolition. I guess I'll be the first one to ask a question about this item, because this is the foundation for the Great Lakes Cheese property. And after a robust discussion at our first business meeting, the council voted this item down flat. So I guess I'm curious why we're getting this again so soon. It sounds to me like, I think what they approved is to use the funding we had in the budget, demolish the building, leave the hardscape sit until there was either a plan where there was a public-private partnership that removes the rest of it, or or funding became available. And so now I get that we have, or what it appears that we have, someone who wants to rubbleize that material and use it as road base, which is a great, I would say, environmentally friendly way to reuse crushed material. But the council was pretty emphatic when it said no to doing the entire project now. They wanted the building down and the concrete foundation left, is where I left off watching it on WebEx. So somebody walk us through what's different.
Well, I guess you didn't ever vote on the budget modification that added funding.
Okay.
You modified the budget modification to just use funding that existed. So, we didn't see that as a failed resolution. We saw it as a modified resolution. When it was presented to you at the Common Council, the Finance Committee approved this.
Right.
It was coming out of the old Finance Committee to the new council. So the old Finance Committee had approved it, and its funding source was debt. So in this situation, we're actually using some community development funds that would be paid by the tax increment district. So the funding source is different. And I think the other issue, and maybe Eric can speak more to this, is we still have the asbestos removal. So when Eric had put his initial budget together, he had taken the bid and added $20,000 for contingency because of things like asbestos. So the original $115,500 is going to pay for the demolition, but we're going to have a pile of asbestos product that needs to be hauled away. So at a minimum, that needs to be funded, because I don't believe that we can, in good conscience, leave that there. And then, as the resolution says, if we choose to delay and haul and remove at a later date, it's going to cost the city more in the long run because you're not going to have that project collaboration with Fulton Street because they're going to have to haul it someplace else. They're not going to be able to use it in a nearby site, but I'll let Eric
I want us to
speak.
talk it through, and I want us to have good minutes about this, because when it gets back to the council, and I'll say that it seemed to me that the back and forth between the council was pretty spirited on this whole thing. When we finally settled on the place where we could finally find common ground, was to tear down the building and leave the rest. It took us a long time to get there, and I don't want to go to war on the council floor with it again. So I want us to have a good discussion here and have good minutes so that the members of the council that aren't part of this understand why this is in front of them, what they're going to feel is a second time. So, Ms. Ryan, and then we'll recognize Eric.
Mary Ann, can't this asbestos issue be dealt with the Holtz-Krauss funding? Wouldn't that
Yes,
funding
but it
apply?
would still require a budget modification. We don't spend money out of any of our funds without budgets. So it would require a budget modification. So that's basically, we are proposing, like I said, to use community development funds to pay it back with the TIF district eventually. So even if you choose to use Holtz-Krauss, you would have to do a budget modification.
Why would you need to do a budget modification if you actually fund it and do the expenditure out of the Holtz-Krauss funds?
Because that's a fund that we prepare a budget for, so we would need to modify the budget, because the budget doesn't expect that we're going to spend $18,000 on this remediation.
But you had said in the other item to be discussed, there was available funds, so why can't it just, the expenditure
'Cause
come
we're
out of
pro-
the Holtz-Krauss funds?
We're proposing to do a budget modification out of that for the Holtz-Krauss as well.
So this is to move from one fund to another, just to realign, is that? Which is what you would end up doing with Holtz-Krauss if you were going to have an unanticipated expense there?
Yes.
Okay, so that's all we're doing really is within the 2020 budget, shifting the earmark from one fund source to another, because neither of them planned for this, right?
Right.
Is that where you're coming from?
Yes, and that's what the resolution says, but it doesn't say that we'll take it out of the Holtz-Krauss. It says we're going to take it out of Community Development Impact Funds.
So either way,
just
though,
that-
the budget modification is a transparent process so that the public can understand where we have
Right.
spent money now that we didn't plan for January 1st.
Correct.
But again, you don't have to do a budget modification if the expenditure is applicable to Holtz-Krauss, which is used for the whole city, and this is environmental, you have a budget there, you have funds available there, that you could authorize the expenditure will be charged to Holtz-Krauss.
Is that a
So
citywide fund, though? That's
And
what I
not out
need
of
to know.
TIF.
Having funds available, I mean, the city, even for its general fund, we have, $13 million of reserves. But when we want to spend out of an expense line item that has not been budgeted for, we do a budget modification. So it's no different than the Holtz-Krauss. We established a budget in the Holtz-Krauss fund, and it didn't anticipate spending $18,000 on asbestos abatement for this project, so we would need to do a budget modification to increase the expenses for that funding source, from that funding
So
source.
I thought you had, in your memo of April 30th, I thought you had said the fund balance in the environmental fund is $1,725,088 as of December 31st. So, to me, I mean, we're talking peanuts compared to what's in the balance.
Right.
And if the environmental fund is for environmental issues throughout the city, that funding, if, again, I don't know the individual grant, and I would assume this is coming from the EPA, and if you're allowed to do this, you could charge it to that super fund. And then you wouldn't have to move a budget or deal with TIF would be strictly out of this fund, which I would think comes from the EPA, and that we already have that funding in hand.
Question, though, the road project in question is already funded by the TID, is that correct?
Yes, but maybe we should only be talking about one agenda item at a time.
Okay, so, right, so 5 and 6 are sort of related, so, right? I mean, is that, or no, that's TID 7. So we're on agenda item number 5 with Great Lakes Cheese and what to do with this foundation of this building. So,
I would think the issue is unnecessary TIF expenditures, is what's kind of in my recollection of what we talked about at the city council. You have the option, instead of just doing a budget transfer, so to take the funds out of the Holte-Krause and inflate the TIF, to just go ahead and approve the expenditure in these environmental funds, which should apply anywhere around the city. So I don't see it as a budget transfer. I see it as how you could be categorizing it, what it should be, though I have not seen the contract, but I'm more than willing to look at it and see what it authorized, and that's available for the whole city. So to me, it's strictly approving the expenditure in the environmental fund.
okay, let's recognize Eric, and then the city attorney.
So as Mary Ann said, we have the unknown asbestos, which was discovered, which was now taken down. They tried to remediate it in place and take it, but they couldn't get it off the wall. So we had to take the concrete down, which is why we have a large pile of concrete with asbestos on it. So it has to be landfilled. So it's gone through the process. The DNR is aware of it. Now it's just kind of sitting there until, so we can close that out with the DNR. We can get rid of that and landfill it. So there's a cost there of just under $18,000 to bring that to the landfill. I think, you know, typically when we have funds in a fund and we want to use them for a project, we earmark those to a project through a budget modification. So, you know, even if we have $1.7 million in a fund, whether it's Holtz-Krause or otherwise, and we want to use it for a specific project, we bring it forward so everybody knows where that money's being spent and what it's being spent on. And so that's really what this budget modification is for, if you choose to use the Holtz-Krause landfill. But but what you're proposing to use is what again?
Well, so we were proposing to use some community development
Right.
funds, and then the TIF district would return the funds when it had the cash flow.
Increment. Yeah.
So if you spend the money out of the environmental fund, you will only be able to spend it once, because there is no funding mechanism to, you know, regenerate those dollars. If you provide the funds temporarily out of the community development impact, and the TID repays those when it has the cash flow to do that, then you still have those environmental funds for other projects. And again, a budget modification is necessary.
A revolving fund. The way you have it proposed is a revolving fund. So the Community Development Fund lends some money.
Yes.
We get this taken care of. When the TID generates a positive increment or a positive cash flow, we replenish that fund, which is internally managed, so that we can reuse it again and again and again.
Yes.
Where if we spend it out of Holtz-Krause, that's a one-shot deal and it's gone forever. It's like giving someone a grant. Once you've done it, there is no going back and there's no replenishing.
Right.
So that's what we have to decide, is where we get that value. Is there a greater value in moving funds between a fund source that you can replenish and reuse, basically recyclable over time? Or do we want to just pay for this and be done, but recognizing that once we pay for it and we're done, the fund that we paid for it out of is permanently impacted? That's the crux of what I hear. Do you have anything else, Eric? If not, we'll bring Ann up.
Sure, yeah, if there's more questions.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd like to briefly go back to the first question you asked, because I think you were thinking correctly, and that was, hey, we said no to this, why are you back here? And I opined to somebody, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't share this with those of you who are members of my client, that it was confusing because it was a very long discussion. However, it was not a failed resolution, as Mary Ann pointed out, so I did not believe it fell under the reintroduction prohibition in the council rules that you have to wait 30 days. What you did is you approved an amended resolution which didn't fund the full project. So I would feel more comfortable if somebody on this committee, if you wanted to bring it back, rather than take real good minutes, I would recommend that you make a motion to reconsider, because that's really what you're doing, is reconsidering funding the remainder of this project. So whether the staff agrees or disagrees with the extent to which you funded it at the last action that you took, we're really bringing it back and asking you again, okay, here we found some other money, now we want you to finish funding this project, and that's still up to the council, but you're bringing it back to the next meeting for
Right.
reconsideration
I
is
guess
what it
as a-
amounts to.
As a council member, I think that some people's reaction is going to be the same thing, because it's going to be, well, did we not just say no to this? But I think that it's important for them to understand the nuances of this conversation if they haven't seen it.
Sure.
And so rather than recount that whole thing on the council floor, either way, regardless of whether it's a reconsideration or a reintroduction, that has got to be accompanied in the packets with some really good minutes. Mayor,
Sure.
you have comments? Go
Yes,
ahead.
sure.
Yeah, the only comment I had was, that's the answer I had to, we kind of had some interesting back and forth about this, and obviously my signature is on the packet, saying, yeah, hey, I think you should all discuss this. And I think when my thought process going through this and saying, yeah, maybe we should release this and talk through this, was the fact that we did say no to the debt. Right, we didn't want to take that on as debt. So if there is another way we can consider this, and especially considering the environmental issue, that was my thought process, and I really want to make sure we have the deliberative discussion here, so that people feel comfortable in what we're talking about.
Sure.
Okay. Committee members, additional thoughts? Sarah and then Deb.
I mean, is there any way that we can use the environmental funds just for the asbestos disposal and then do the borrowing for the remaining piece? Or have two budget modifications, one go to council just for the asbestos removal and then one for the other?
We could do that.
So you pay for the asbestos abatement out of Holtz-Krause? And the
Yes.
concrete rubblization out of the CDA?
Right. Again, long-term, it impacts the work that the city can do to maintain Holtz-Krause, and, versus if it's charged to the TID, the increment will pay for that, and so that Holtz-Krause fund remains intact to fund future maintenance costs.
Our remaining obligation out there is it limited strictly to the venting system that's constantly running out there and the ongoing Conestoga Rovers management process, or is there more that we could be tagged with out there?
Right. So when, back in 2012 or 2013, whenever it was that we received a certificate of completion on that landfill and all of the remediation had been completed, before that, the city had full responsibility for the cap. We were doing groundwater monitoring. We were maintaining the flare for remediation as well as for aesthetics, because, we need to release the gas so it's not smelly over there. And we were maintaining all of the surfaces, mowing all of the land. Once that completion certificate was completed, the DNR and the state of Wisconsin basically released us from environmental going forward. Like certainly if someone did something that they shouldn't have, like create new pollution or mistreat the land or something, the DNR maybe could come back to us, but basically they released us from liability. That's my understanding, but we do still have some ongoing maintenance costs. So that flare, we're still maintaining. It's no longer providing remediation work. It's just eliminating smell. But there are some ongoing costs. We still are supposed to be maintaining some of the grassy areas around, not where the soccer fields are, but in the surrounding area. And, you know, we have just some general planning that we've been doing. Kevin Fable goes out there and, you know, reviews and looks at it, so his time is charged to that fund on an ongoing basis. You know, certainly, as I said, we had 1.7 million in there. This is not going to break that fund, but it seems, again, if you can maintain its integrity so that it can pay future remediation costs because you have an alternate funding source, which in this situation is the tax increment district, why would you not use that and save this for future remediation where there is no other funding source available?
Well, it is true. I mean, going
But it
forward, that is all
certainly
the
is
money
the-
we have for that forever.
Right,
So we
but-
have to, I guess, be frugal with that as well, but.
Right, but I definitely recognize that it's the council's decision of how they want to fund that.
Certainly. Deb, you had a secondary comment? Go ahead.
Yes, I guess I don't know the extent of what the environmental fund is, so I do think that should be reviewed and see if you are allowed to use it as revolving.
We are. When we received the certificate of completion, it basically released our requirement to maintain the fund. So when that occurred, as my memo said, back in 2012 or 2013, the Common Council approved using that fund as a loan source for tax increment district number 3. So we are allowed to use it for other purposes.
Well, and
I would like to see that written as part of the packet.
I don't believe there's anything specifically in writing. It was covered at multiple meetings that we attended, but I was
So
not able to find
the
anything where you can.
certificate that we would have gotten from the DNR that enabled us to develop the soccer field in the first place, that release has to be on file, either with them or with us, I would think. I remember seeing that because I was not a fan of the soccer field project until we got out from under the liability. But I thought we had documentation on that, on that closure. I guess I don't remember, but I thought I'd seen it in the packet before.
Well, having worked on grant management for over 20 years, I'm used to looking at the documents and what you can do and what you can't
It
do.
wasn't grant funded, Deb. It didn't come from the EPA.
Where did
the
it
money.
come from?
From our insurance carrier.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so the
So
pollution
again,
liability carrier.
Yes.
We're talking
Okay.
about something we don't have the document, we don't have the information on it, so we can't verify it and what the rules are. It just seems to me to be very unusual to be able to use it as a revolving fund when the expenditure could be taken directly out of the funds, and then not having to extend the TIF another year or two for additional expenditures when these funds could be used directly, and as they whittle down, you could be going after additional funds. So
There,
I
okay.
think we need an opinion and need to get more information on that. And I do think that some of it could be considered to be charged expenditure-wise to that fund. And I guess I'm all for not increasing the TIF expenditures, especially if you don't have the funding for it, to pay for it, and that you could be looking at some other foundations, such as the Alexander Foundation, which had a revolving fund, and you could lay out those kind of rules and get that okay from the Alexander Foundation. But this just seems very iffy, in my opinion, and that we don't have the information in writing, details of it, of what the purpose is, just that it was used as a revolving fund back in 2013, which is over 7 years ago. So it's like, well, was that really appropriate or not?
Okay, so, but where we're at is, and what we can quantify is we know that the fund sources that were originally proposed before our conversation turned to the Holtz-Krause funding, those budget line items are quantified, and so the original budget modification as proposed, if we were not going to dip into the Holtz-Krause, that topic originated here. There was no way that the staff could have could have prepared for a split fund source, not knowing that we were going to try to take that direction. So that said, though, the original proposal, as it was in the packets, I believe that does not call for additional TID debt. It says the TID would reimburse community development when it has sufficient funding or increment. So we are not increasing the life of the TID or its debt load to accommodate this repayment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Michael has his hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
Okay, the question I have is we are paying us construction, let's see, I missed, 25,680 for the removal of the concrete, and their proposal is to crush that and use it as the base for the Fulton Street project. Will we be able to recover some of those costs then in their bid on Fulton Street? Or if we forego them crushing the asphalt and leave the slab there, will we see an additional expense in the construction of Fulton Street?
Yeah, so previously, this project as a whole was approved with DNR Recycling, and then Dean had passed away, during that process. So the entire project was RFP'd again, for the demo. So what Haas has done is they've already included that in their bid in Fulton Street. And so that is part of their bid. And I've talked to them about that, and they said, well, if the city doesn't want to pay to have that crushed and removed, then that's something they're just going to have to eat with Fulton. I mean, they've already included that into their bid in Fulton with the anticipation that they would be removing that. And so there isn't, so right now, we're kind of at the point, the reason this came back so quickly is because they're about done out on site with the money that the city has allocated with the building down and the removal. And so if they move off-site and then we ask them later on or somebody else to come in, we're going to have to pay another mobilization charge to get rid of this slab and then the asphalt. So I think that's why I say if we do it later on, it's going to cost us more than what it's going to cost us now.
Okay. That said, then we would not be looking at additional costs for additional road base then if this material wasn't available under the street contract?
No, because we already have bids for that.
Bids for that, and those are locked in? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess let's see if we can get where we're trying to go one way or another here. Do we have a motion then from the committee to approve the budget modification as originally proposed with the originally proposed fund source, which was the CDA funds reimbursed by TID 3 when it's able to pay, not incurring additional debt? Do we have such a motion? Motion by Herbst. Is there a second for that motion?
Second by Martins.
Second by Martins. Further discussion or questions?
I would propose that we modify the resolution, which is file number 19-1109, that says it was introduced May 13th, today's May 5th, that we would take out the $8,250 from the $52,000, and then pay the expenditure of asbestos removal, $17,680 from the Holtz-Cross funds. And then we would have the balance being paid out of the Community Development Impact Fund loan.
Okay. So with that, we have an amendment from Deb to basically split the fund the way Sarah had proposed. Some of the funding for the environmental issue out of the Holtz-Krause fund, the rest from the originally proposed fund source. Do we have a second for Deb's amendment?
Excuse me, Lisa. From what Eric was saying, the $8,250 is actually included in the Fulton bids.
No.
So
It's not.
that we would reduce that amount.
No, it
That's
was
not
not.
correct. So these are the costs they gave us for that removal. And according to Haas, that these costs are less than what it actually cost them because they plan on using that material on the Fulton Street project. And so what they planned on doing is taking that, crushing it on site at the GLC site and just moving it to Fulton. So so according to them, they were giving us a better price that way because they don't have to truck it and haul it off anywhere else. They can use it just down the street.
So would that be a different TIF district then?
Nope.
Nope.
No, it's all three.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then to clarify your amendment, was that where you were trying to get with the amendment, was to split that funding, though, for the asbestos part into Holtz-Krause and the rest from the proposed source?
Yes, but I had thought there could be a saving of the $8,250 within the Fulton RFP so that the impact would not be the $52,000.
If there isn't, though, do you still want your amendment, or do you want to withdraw your motion?
My motion is then to charge the expenditure for asbestos removal from the Holtz-Krause Fund, and then to go ahead and charge the balance to the Community Development Impact Fund loan.
Okay. Do we have a second for Deb's amendment? Is there a second for Deb's amendment? Amendment dies for lack of a second. We'll vote on the initial item. With a motion and a second on the floor for that, this is to fund it as originally proposed. We'll call the roll. Watson?
Nay.
Okay. Martins?
Aye.
Herbst? Ryan?
No,
I'll vote aye. That motion will pass 3-2. And I'll put a request out right now that the minutes of this discussion be very, very complete, because I think there's going to be some misunderstandings when we get back to the council floor based on the discussion that we had on the 28th of April. So just putting it out there.
Lisa, could you ask Michael to put his hand down?
Oh, Michael, your hand is stuck up on the WebEx. Can you lower, please? Thank you. Okay, item number 6 is discussion and possible action on a budget modification for street improvements under tax increment district number 7. And Mary Ann, if you'd like to walk us through this item?
Sure. So we amended tax increment district number 7 in April, and that amendment added a project cost of $1.1 million for street improvements. We accepted, we put out for bid, and the low bid was $671,000. We had not established a street improvement budget for it yet. We had just done the project plan amendment, so there isn't funds budgeted at this time for that activity. When Alan put his estimate together of 1.1 million, he was using costs that we have experienced in prior years. So the bid is extremely favorable, given that it's only 671,000. So we had originally anticipated, based on that 1.1 million, that tax increment district number 7 would retire in 2023. But because of that bid savings, it will move it up 1 year, and it will now, based on my projections, close in 2022. The expenditure period for tax increment district number 7 ends on January 10th of 2021. So really, this year's construction season is its last year to spend money. When we put the project plan together, there are some other projects in the district for 2020, but those were included in the 2020 budget already. When we put the project plan together for this amendment, we expected to pay for the 1.1 million over a 3-year period, and our financial advisors estimated interest rate during that time period of 2.25%. So if we went out and borrowed funds, based on that retirement schedule, there would be about $21,000 of interest and then $10,000 worth of debt issuance costs. Looking for a financial alternative, a financial source for this funding, at that point, I thought perhaps we would want to use the environmental fund. Because it's going to be able to pay those funds back in 2 years, it would be completed by May of 2022. So the funds would be returned to the environmental fund by May of 2022. And you could actually charge the tax increment district the interest, the $21,000 worth of interest. So you would actually be adding money to the environmental fund to fund future environmental projects. So we included in the packet the cash flow for the tax increment district with these projects in there, a map of the street projects. I know I received an email from Deb Ryan at 4 o'clock today asking for a cost breakdown per street, but it was bid out as one item, and so there's just quantities. It doesn't really specify this street is going to be $100,000, that street is going to be $150,000. And, Ellen thought that if we tried to cut the cost too much, that they would probably not be willing to do it for that, for what they had proposed, because there is economies of scale and efficiencies when you're doing a lot of projects in one specific area.
Sure, we've had that before, even with the sidewalk contract, where if you cut it too much, no one wants to do it, because there's just not enough to make it worth their time.
Right.
And so usually if you bid out a larger project, you'll get either more bids or better bids, because they're already working in the area. So, that said, I am all about an early closure for TID 7. I think that's fantastic. If we can return funds to the general fund a year sooner than we planned, that's a huge win, and we always want to do that. The other thing that, we can look at, even if, like you said, we utilize the environmental fund in the short term, if the TID will have the means to reimburse that fund with interest going forward, then our future utilization of that fund will just have more to work with, which certainly makes sense. Committee members, do you have questions or comments? Go ahead, Deb.
I guess for the different streets, he could probably just go ahead and how many square feet were for each one. But I guess my concern is mainly for the Highway 52 Parkway. I recently was at the left-hand turn at 18th Avenue in Stewart, looking at the birds and the rocks, and thousands of cigarette butts between the rocks. So it just seems that there are some people that are not fans of the birds. And the parkway is basically done, so I thought you were looking at some other type of streetscaping or
Yeah.
landscaping as such, and what is that amount?
Yes, so the Highway 52 Parkway is being landscaped. That was included in the 2020 budget, and that has been bid out and the contracts have been signed. So there wasn't a budget modification required for that. And the Brockmeyer Park parking lot was included in the budget as well. So those, we didn't require a budget modification. It was just these street improvements. So when we went to the Joint Review Board, we weren't adding to the project costs of the TID plan for that 52 Parkway.
So you're saying the 52 Parkway, even though it's highlighted as being part of what you're doing, it's not within this amendment?
Correct.
So,
So if you look, I, of course, just have a copy in black and white, but these are color-coded. My recollection is the Highway 52 Parkway is red.
It's green.
Oh, it's green? Okay. So then the chart down below should show that it is
Landscape.
landscape, yep. So we're just doing the street work in this budget modification.
So the concrete pavement repair for Stewart, and then all the red streets?
Yes, is in this budget modification.
Okay.
okay, I'm confused because I read it as being part of the motion, and it just seems, from what I saw of the birds and that, just seems that we have enough landscaping with the birds that having grass as a median on the Highway 52 Parkway is fine. And you would need more additional maintenance, more additional time for DPW on other TIF projects and other TIF parks that have grown, taking away additional dollars. So I was going to ask to take out that enhancement, since from what I'm seeing of the Birds project, I wouldn't want to be picking up all those cigarette butts.
The upside is that we're not getting more birds. I'll say that we talked about that Phase 2 of that landscaping in SISM and in economic development both, and we asked that there be clear acknowledgement that the mistakes of the past be recognized and not repeated. And so that included uplighting that a person can't see, trees that get planted underneath the streetlights that need to be moved, the stuff that needs sprinklered with no water, public art that massively exceeds the budgeted amount, and a flawed process to get there. So we have not forgotten Birds Phase 1 by any means, and so we asked that that Phase 2 not include any of those things that require hand mowing. And, around those rocks. They're out there hand mowing around those rocks because you can't ride a lawnmower out there. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that got learned in Phase 1 that shouldn't be part of Phase 2. But when we look at the section that's proposed for Phase 2, there's a lot of complaints from both the businesses and some constituents out there, if I remember right, that is largely unkempt. Right now, it's a dandelion field, and it was landscaped by the Department of Transportation, and all they do is put in 3 skinny trees that all look like toothpicks. They never mature properly, or they get hit, or whatever happens. And so the aesthetic of that whole half as a gateway to the community versus the aesthetic of the half that's at least done is vastly different. And so we asked for a total revamp of what happens with that Phase 2 so that we don't get a replay of Phase 1. We learned a lot that first go-around. So, go ahead, Sarah. Oh, Michael, too. Let's recognize Sarah and then Michael.
So Deb, I think on it's page 27, I think, of the packet, doesn't it say at the detailed list of the projects, the street improvements are the 1.1 million, right? And
Yes.
the streetscape was 200,000.
Yes.
Right, so that's independent of the 1.1.
Correct.
Right.
And that, yes. Yep.
So with that clarification, do we have a motion from Finance then to approve that budget modification for those streetscape improvements? Oh, wait, we got to recognize Michael
Not
first,
the
sorry.
streetscape.
Oh, not the
street
streetscape,
improvements.
street improvements, sorry. I have streetscape on the brain because I just gave my spiel about birds. Go ahead, Michael, sorry.
Okay, this time I remembered to lower my hand. I got too many buttons here. I'm working for this, the virtual thing. I think, not wanting to have to bring the birds into this whole issue. I know as a bicyclist, stopping at any intersection with a traffic signal, you will see cigarette butts everywhere. So anything would be improvement that doesn't collect those butts. But I would agree with Elisa there that the existing streetscaping on the 52 Parkway is a sad sight. Those trees are not thriving at all. They do look half dead. So, but I just going to continue up my thoughts, or just going to continue on and say I'll make a motion to approve this so we can move forward.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Second by Herbst. Further discussion or questions? Oh, Mary Ann, then Deb.
So do you want to add to the resolution that the district would pay a 2.25% interest back to the remediation fund, or just return its principal that it borrows?
I feel like if we can get interest into a fund that's recyclable, it makes sense for us. What do you guys think? Do we want to charge the interest and bolster the fund?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, I
I'm
see
good
heads
with that
nodding.
too,
Mike, too? Okay. I think we agreed by consensus on that, for sure. Okay, and then Deb, go ahead.
In Mary Ann's memo from April 30th, it had said that the Brockmeyer parking improvements was $100,000 and $200,000 for the streetscape improvements. And I believe Katie was at the meeting, and as well as Sarah at the park meeting this week, and that I believe Brockmeyer was only asking for $25,000 for the parking improvements. So I would recommend that we amend.
I think we're getting a future agenda item from them. I watched that meeting on TV last night, and I think what they were trying to say is that over what was budgeted for the parking lot improvements, they found that they were able to do a lot of it in-house. And so they were actually looking to keep their line item for their budget, but they wanted to divert 25,000 of it to JoJo's Jungle to reinstate a water feature that they were almost done fundraising with and ready to build, but they just needed to kick it across the finish line. I think we'd be wise, though, to wait for that request, because that committee's minutes aren't ready yet, but that's kind of what I heard from Jamie Polly, was it's more like a splitting up of
Right.
the same money. They didn't want to give money back, though.
Right.
that-
That's my understanding from talking to Jamie about that project as well.
Okay, so we can wait on that and take separate action, because the parks are all closed right now anyway, so, or at least for that.
So you're okay about just holding off on was it the 200,000?
Well, we'd previously approved. The parking lot at Brockmeyer's already approved in the 2020 budget.
That's
So we don't
correct.
have to take action on that tonight.
Okay.
If we want to split it up, we have to. You know, when they come back with a proposal and they want 75 here and 25 there, we'll have to approve that as a change of purpose. But we wouldn't have to do it tonight.
Okay, I would be okay if we take that portion out for
Okay.
tonight. Thank you.
All right, so then with a motion and a second on the floor, we'll call the roll. Martins? Herbst? Watson? Ryan?
I guess if it's the 200,000 is out of this action,
The 200,000 was the previous action, so yes, it's out. Marian's nodding.
Yes.
It's out.
so would the financial impact then be 472,000?
No, it's 672. The bid for street improvements was 671,000.
So
Some odd
672
dollars.
instead of 1.1 mil, is that?
Correct.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so Ryan is an aye, and I'll vote aye as well. That passes unanimously. Item number 7 is discussion and possible action on renewal of a parking lot lease with Colonial Property 4 LLC at Grant and Third. We've got some information on the packets on this as well. I guess, Marianne, if you want to walk us through this, these are kind of, they come up periodically, and it looks like this one's due again, so.
Correct.
Is this-
This
okay.
is for the parking lot directly in front of Evolutions or next to the ice cream shop on Third. So there's 44 parking stalls. The city has been leasing this facility, this parking lot, for probably 25 years. If you read the lease, it indicates that we will make payments equal to $1,975 per month and reimburse them for their real estate taxes, because they're it's owned by a private entity. They're charged real estate taxes, so we reimburse them the real estate. And that 1975 is a continuation of the current term. So there is no changes to the financial terms of the agreement. There was some tweaking of the language to recognize that we no longer are using parking meters, that we use a pay station, and that we would be allowed to have parking rules signage installed in the parking lot.
Okay. With that, do we have a motion from Finance to approve? Motion by Herbst, is there a second? Do we have a second? To approve?
Second by Martins.
Second by Martins. Further discussion or questions? Oh, go ahead, Deb.
I know the city had also some parking behind, I guess, north by the church, I believe, behind their school in past years.
Which church?
Is it the Methodist one?
Oh, this church here? Are you talking
No,
about
no, the
Unitarian?
one a couple blocks north.
So this is the Presbyterian. The Unitarian Church also has public parking. The city currently doesn't use any public parking there.
Okay. Well, I guess I've I've lived in areas where you had to pay for your parking. Also lived in Chicago where you had to take public transportation, and we have a lot of options, and even for myself, or Andrew Plath, who's on the pedestrian, I've walked from 7th Avenue over here to the city, and I don't think we should be expecting to be paying for employees' parking if they want to go ahead and do that, but there's other options, including biking, and that it should be at their expense.
This is
This isn't-
consumer parking, right,
Right,
though?
th-
We don't have permits in that lot, do we?
No, we don't have any employees parking there.
This is customer parking.
This is for customer parking for downtown.
It's next to Suites on Third.
Well, why isn't it something that the River District covers?
Because it's a municipal parking lot. We own the parking lot, or we are the parking authority that charges people to park there. And so the River District makes no money off, I mean, there's commerce, obviously, that happens, but I don't know that they have the financial resources to pay for that on our behalf, even if I don't think there's any way their board would approve something like that. If we are the parking authority that charges people to park in the lot, and we've parked our pay station out there, I think we are the lessee. Is that?
So it's this property that we're leasing and paying real estate taxes for, and then using it as additional parking.
Well, you
for
waive off
downtown.
the real estate taxes because you can't waive taxes, but you refund the tax because it's taxed as a vacant lot or a parking lot at a low level, and it doesn't have a building on it. So part of our lease terms is that you basically refund the taxes through our fees.
I still disagree with, especially with the parking revenues were 50,000 at a loss last year, and we're expecting with these other parking permits that it should be something that we should reconsider how we're using our city dollars.
Okay. All right. So noted. Thank you for that. We do have a motion and a second on the floor, though. Let's go ahead and vote on this item, and then we have a presentation after. With a motion and a second on the floor, we'll call the roll. Herbst?
I think I'm saying aye.
Aye, okay. Martins?
Aye.
Watson? Ryan?
No.
And I'll vote aye as well. That item will pass 4-1. That's the last business item on our agenda, and then we've got item number 8, which is the 2019 financial presentation, and Mary Ann's got a PowerPoint for that, so if you want to go ahead.
Yep. So I thought this would be a good introduction to the city's finances. At a future meeting, we'll go through and discuss how COVID-19 is impacting our budget as well. 2019, the auditors are actually, we are audited annually, and it's a financial audit, so they're looking at the financial statements and giving an opinion that they're fairly presented, as well as a compliance audit for single audit purposes and laws and regulations. So it's a combination of those two items. But we usually don't have any audit adjustments, so I feel confident in giving you the results before the audit is completed. And the auditors do come once that audit is completed and give a presentation to the Finance Committee as well. So you'll receive direct communication through a presentation from the auditors. So, not knowing how familiar everybody is with governmental accounting, but we use fund accounting, and it really allows us to track our spending and our revenues by program or by activity. So the general fund is where most of our services are provided from. So we have, categories such as administration, public safety, refuse, and transportation, and parks and recreation. Those are the major activities that take place in the general fund. Administration is about 11% of our expenses in the general fund. Public safety is about 52%. Refuse and recycling, or not recycling, just refuse is about 2.5%. 8%. Transportation is about 26.5%, and Parks and Rec is about 8%. Looking at our profit and loss, you can see that in 2019, in the general fund, our profit right now is $743,392, and that follows 5 years of profits that we've generated in the fund. The profit for 2019 would have been $1,367,392, but the Common Council elected to transfer funds to transfer money to other funds by about $625,000. So it reduced our profit because we transferred that money to other funds for other activities that take place out of the general fund. In addition, of that $743,000, we are required to adjust our investments and reflect them at fair market value on an annual basis. And so, the city, when we invest funds in government securities, we invest and we hold. We're not actively trading our investments. But the proper government accounting standards require that we reflect the fair market value of those investments at the end of the year. And so our investments appreciated $346,000. There was a $346,000 appreciation swing from December 31st of 2018 to December 31st of 2019. So that increased our income by that $346,000, but the city will never see that income because we will hold those investments to maturity and we will get par value of that government security. So it really is just rearranging in what year you recognize the investment income. So I do want to point out that not all of that $742,000 is real cash in the door. Some of that is reflecting market. If we go to the next slide, it shows the financial impact of those last 5 years of surplus to our fund balance. So in 2015, our total fund balance in the general fund was $10,024,000. We're now up to $13,600,000. So we've seen a growth in our fund balance of $3.6 million. So that, we have a very strong fund balance, and, there's a lot of security in knowing that we have a good, strong fund balance. So governmental accounting standards and principles indicate that we have to categorize our fund balance by what its availability to meet the future year's demands. So when we make advances to tax increment districts, which we do on a regular basis, we have to show that as non-spendable because we have allocated it for to cover the deficit of the district. So at the end of the year, TID 3 had advance from the general fund of $1.3 million, TID 7, $700,000, TID 9, $158,000, and TID 12, $688,000. So that totaled $2.9 million. So a portion of that $13 million is reserved as non-spendable, as well as we have inventory at the end of the year. We purchase salt for the winter, so we have salt inventory, we have paper inventory, and that inventory has already been spent. It's an asset, but it's already been spent. And so that, again, we have to classify as non-spendable. So that reduces our undesignated fund balance by that inventory. Then we have a contingency fund, so we've committed it in a little pot of money called contingency, so that's $193,000. Years ago, the council authorized using $500,000 of our fund balance for commercial rehab projects, so that $500 is committed. And then in our budget, we authorized carryover funding of $287,000. So at the end of the year, our unassigned, so that's just available for future budgets, is $9,364,000. So that's up from 2015 of $5 million. I guess, per our fund balance, we should have about 16.67% of our expenditures, so about 5.3 or 5, around 5.5 million. So you can see that our unassigned fund balance is very strong. Looking at our contingency, we have maintained a relatively flat contingency. We don't use or find a need to use contingency very often. In 2019's budget, we did set aside 30,000 additional funds for contingency just because the salary study had not been implemented and we didn't know if we would need a little bit more money for implementation of the contingency fund, but it wasn't necessary to use any of it for that. So you can see that our contingency balance grew by that 30,000 that was budgeted in 2019. Again, our advances to the general fund, as I indicated before, at the end of 2019, were $2,922,438. Just kind of giving a history of what those advances were, you can see that we were running about 3.8 million for a 4-year period, and we are seeing a decline in those advances. So the TID districts are needing less funds, and I would like to have a presentation on TIDs at a future meeting, but basically, the way TIDs are created is you make your infrastructure investment upfront, and then the new growth that occurs because of that infrastructure investment pays for those improvements over time. And so generally speaking, a new district or a district that's funding a lot of infrastructure is going to maintain deficits, and those deficits will be eliminated as the district matures. So looking at our general fund revenues, you can see that this is really the area that caused our surplus. We had strong performance basically in almost all categories of our revenues except for our fines and forfeitures. And there wasn't any one item that in any of these categories that really outperformed. When we're looking at revenues, we try to look at trends over time. So, like let's say last year we saw a huge spike in building permit revenue. We're not going to increase the budget in the next year to reflect that revenue level that we experienced the year before, because it creates difficulties when you see a downturn in the economy. So we are looking at long-term trends on our revenues and adjusting more in baby steps, I'll call them. So if you see long-term trends of revenues going up, at that time we would make revenue adjustments to try to prevent when the economy turns around or turns, and then not only are we having to increase the levy for general operations, but we're having to recover these lost revenue sources too. Again, one of the biggest ones was miscellaneous revenue. That's where our interest income is, and again, 346,000 of that is adjustment to market value of the securities that we're holding, and that it really just brings that revenue into 2020, where if you weren't recording fair market value, it would have been recorded in 2021 or 2022 or 2023, whenever the bonds were outstanding and paying their quarterly payments of interest. So from a property tax standpoint, just to kind of give you an idea of when we look at the 2018 budget to the 2019 budget, who needed more property taxes to balance the budget. The general fund received most of the increase in property taxes between those 2 years, as well as the central capital purchasing. So a couple of years ago, when we were looking at our capital plan, we saw that departments were asking for the same ongoing replacements, and it was competing with capital requests that were less frequent. So I'll give an example of turnout gear for fire department or PCs for, the city. We were funding that out of our capital budget, so every year Jerry Klein was coming and asking for $80,000 for PCs. Well, it created competition problems because, you need PCs. And so projects like roofs, things like that, where they were getting pushed off because we needed to replace these replaceable items. So they created the Central Capital Purchasing Fund to try to take the burden off of those things that are continually needing replacement. So we upped our budget, or our levy in that capital purchasing fund, and I believe in 2019, a lot of that did go to the regular items that need to be replaced in IT. General fund expenditures, this is by activity again. You can see that out of a $35 million budget, we had $168,000 left. So that's a very close budget. The general government activity returned about $425,000. The majority of that was position vacancies, the city clerk, municipal court, assessment, legal, all experienced some vacancies, either where a new position was created and it took a while to get that position filled, or there was an actual position vacancy. And then the legal department returned funds because their professional services line item for legal was not all spent. So that's about the $425,000. You can see public safety returned about $160,000. Again, very close budget. Transportation and streets, we did do a budget modification in the fall to try to anticipate the winter because we knew we were coming close, and so we did a budget modification for streets. Of course, the month of December was really bad. Justin Lowe said it was like the 100-year winter. And so, once you do all of your adjustments at year end, that street due to winter maintenance was over. If I compared the 2018 winter activity to the 2019 winter activity, our budget swing in just winter maintenance was about $800,000. So you can see that 100-year winter really impacted our budget significantly. We had a little bit left, about $20,000 in our refuse, so that's the curbside garbage pickup, and then Parks Department returned $131,000. So the net of those is we actually had about $168,000 positive variance. If we slice the budget another way and look at it more from how did we look at individual line items versus departments or activities, you can see that just looking at our salaries and fringe benefits, we had about $291,000 left in all of the general fund departments in salaries and fringe benefits. Salaries and wages, again, a little bit over. Our major savings was in the health insurance fund. And again, salaries and wages, we saw quite a bit of overtime because of snow removal. Under the contractual services area, again, just kind of giving you a breakdown of what some of the major expenses are. So the Motorpool Fund, the city maintains a separate fund for Motorpool, and how that functions is all of the costs of maintaining the city's fleet, whether it be an electrical truck, a police car, a fire truck, the pickup trucks that the inspections department uses, those are all purchased out of the Motorpool Fund, and the Motorpool Fund pays for the maintenance, the fuel, and it funds the replacement of those assets when they need to be replaced. And so to generate cash to make those purchases for those replacements, they charge the departments that are using that fleet either an hourly rate or a mileage rate. And it's based on the rates that the DOT, the state of Wisconsin DOT uses. So because we had a very heavy winter and we had graders out on the street and all of the snow removal with dump trucks, et cetera, our motor pool that was charged to the general fund was $3,500,000. So we weren't actually taking that cash and sending it to a vendor. We were sending it to another fund to fund the fuel that we used, the maintenance, and to purchase new vehicles in the future. Again, comparing that to the prior year, because of that winter activity, we were about $350,000 more in expense in motor pool in 2019 than we were in 2018, again, because those graders are charged to winter maintenance based on the hours that they're used. So the more winter activity we have, the higher the motor pool charge. Generally speaking, the other areas are relatively stable in expenses. For example, we have a 10-year contract on refuse that provides for an automatic 2% increase, so our refuse went up about $20,000 from the prior year. We have been seeing stable utility costs. We haven't seen a lot of rate increases with Wisconsin Public Service. So again, it can depend on how cold the winter is, if we experience more heating days, but generally speaking, we don't see a lot of volatility in our utilities. Then the repairs and maintenance, one of the big costs of that is different kinds of street maintenance work, not where we're making permanent improvements to the infrastructure, but things like doing the lines, signs, doing seal coating, things like that. And the CCITC budget for our IT department, this is their operating budget, plus it would be if we have a software maintenance agreement, so assessment, when we get that new software, that would be budgeted for in this contractual services. In addition to the $783,000, they also charge departments for what is called PC maintenance and phone maintenance, and so each department pays annual fee based on the number of PCs that they have in their department. So if you look at our budget, you can see in 2018, in contractual services, our actual costs were $7.8 million. In 2019, again, a large share of that was because of motor pool. We were up to 8.3, and we were over budget in that contractual services. Again, we're under budget overall in the general fund, but just if we look at all contractual services line items together, we were over budget. The general fund supplies and expenses, this is where you see all of your training costs, publication and dues, postage, medical supplies for EMS activity. That budget in 2019 was $1.3 million. Our actual was $1.2 million, and up slightly from 2018, where it was $1.1 million. General fund materials, these categories are generally used by DPW and the Parks Department. Again, when we look at that, you can see that the salt was $520,000. So this would be based on usage because we have an inventory of salt. So we draw it out of inventory and it hits the budget when we use it, not when we purchase it. So we used $521,000 worth of salt in the 2019 year. The year before, 2018, we used $371,000. So you can see, again, a reflection of that bad winter. And then also, we saw an increase of about 100,000 in the hot mix. Again, we've been, as the condition of our streets are declining, the DPW is having to do more pothole filling and stepping up their activity on that. So again, this area considerably higher in 2019 than 2018 and over budget. Fixed charges is where we pay for insurance. This would probably be the area where the departments are paying IT for their PC maintenance. Again, generally speaking, these have been stable numbers and not a lot of expenses. The land rental, I can tell you, is for the snow dump site at the cemetery. And then the last categories in the general fund are just other expenditures. The grants and contributions includes bad debt expense. And that's the main component is bad debt expense. And about 31,000 of that bad debt was related to writing off personal property tax because while the county settles with us each year, so we don't hold any receivables for real estate taxes at the end of the year, personal property, we maintain the receivable on that. And so we go through and look at those working with the city attorney's office on collectability and make recommendations to the common council for write-off of PP, and then we're able to charge that write-off back to the school and the county and the technical college to get reimbursed for it. And then, as I indicated before, 625,000 was transferred to other funds. 65,000 was transferred to the recycling fund, 200,000 was transferred to the parking fund, 50,000 to the airport fund, and 310,000 to the capital improvement fund for seal coating. When we looked back at 2016, and we were evaluating our street maintenance, the engineering department pointed out to us that if we had a more robust seal coating program, that we would actually be able to save off replacing our streets, that it would buy us 8 to 10 years if we had a robust seal coating. So we tried to figure out a way that we could improve our budgeting for seal coating without hitting the taxpayers immediately with a $300,000 increase in the levy for just that one item. And so what the council decided is that we would increase our operating budget each year by $50,000 to build up an annual fund for seal coating, and then we would look at year end, and if the general fund had generated a profit, that next year we would transfer about $350,000 to seal coating. And so that is that $310,000. So we have done that now in 2019, 2018, and 2017. And we have really gotten caught up on some of the backlog on seal coating, and now that seal coating budget is $200,000 a year, but it should be more like $400,000. So this is an ongoing goal of ours to increase the budget by that $50,000. Go to the next slide. So now we're kind of moving out of the general fund to our special revenue funds. And so we have a number of special revenue funds. Again, with governmental accounting, we're trying to track our revenues that are for specific purposes to the expenses, and using fund accounting helps us do that. And our community development department maintains a number of funds. Many of them came from federal or state dollars back in the day. And many of these are used as revolving loan funds to fund mortgage assistance or rehabilitation projects. So the Hud Mortgage Fund, again, just trying to show what their fund balance is over a period of time so that you can see the stability and health of the individual funds. So the mortgage fund, you can see, does vary again by the amount of loans that they've issued and the repayment terms on those loans, but it's been relatively stable. The economic development fund has remained relatively stable. The room tax fund is basically managed by the Room Tax Commission. EMS grant funding, again, would be a grant-related program. The environmental cleanup fund, that's the $1.7 million that we were talking about earlier in the meeting. Other general grants and special purposes accounts, again, maintaining a relatively stable fund balance. The housing stock improvement fund is used, we received funds out of tax increment district number 2 to do housing improvement, and that's what that fund is used for. And then on the next slide, the majority of these are related to community development, the block grant. This is where there's federal money from HUD comes in each year, and there are programs related to that, and that is allocated by the Community Development Advisory Board. Again, old DLAD money, that's a revolving fund. The federal rent rehab is a revolving fund. The WRRP is a revolving fund. The hazmat fund is a contract that we have with the state of Wisconsin to provide response for hazardous material spills. Public access is our people that do the videoing. The recycling fund, again, is doing our curbside recycling pickup, our street sweeping, or our leaf pickup for in the fall, as well as our yard waste site. The 400 block is receiving room tax dollars, and then those funds are spent on activity related to the 400 block. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of all of our special revenue funds. The next fund to cover is our debt service fund. So each year, we adopt a budget for our debt service fund. You can see that general property taxes are $4,123,000. Transfers in from other funds, such as our tax increment districts to retire their debt, is $7,045,000. Oftentimes, when we're issuing debt, we are actually provided with a premium on the borrowing, and that is a revenue source for us, so that was $256,000. And then interest income, things like that, is that other revenue. But we were able to retire $9,436,000 of principal, interest payments of $2,178,000. So our net change in fund balance was a decline in fund balance of $120,000. So we maintain a fund balance of $1,078,000. If you look at property taxes in the debt service fund over time, going all the way back to 2002, our levy was $4,157,000. So from 2002 to 2011, we were able to maintain a stable levy for debt service of $4,156,866. In 2012, we dropped that down by about $69,000 to $4,088,000, and it remained at $4,088,000 from 2012 to 2014. And then in 2015, it rose by $35,000 to $4,123,000, and we have been levying the $4,123,000 since that time. And we'll be going through a full presentation on our debt going forward, but this kind of gives you an idea of what the levy of debt service looks like. What's your next slide? Oh, good. So if we, just looking at how we retire debt, our debt outstanding at the end of 2019 was, and this is excluding the revenue bonds from the utility, is $83,869,000. But you can see that of the existing debt, it does step down because each year we're making principal payments. So in 2020, we're making about $10,480,000 worth of principal payments. In 2021, $8,730,000. And each year, that debt goes down. Of course, each year as part of our CIP projects, we are incurring additional debt. So you do experience new debt coming on as old debt is retired. In 2019, we did have a pretty robust CIP program because we built a new fire station. That is $4,788,000 in the 2019 budget. We borrowed for that over a 20-year period of time, and we chose not to borrow for their furniture and fixtures or their contingency. We decided, because we didn't know if they were going to need their contingency, and so we decided to borrow for contingency and furniture and equipment in 2020 and issued that debt as 10-year debt, so that it wasn't a 20-year issue, because most likely we'd be replacing that furniture and such before that 20-year period. But our street department in the CIP budget was $2.4 million. We also built a evidence storage facility for our police department. We made parking improvements of about $300,000, equipment of $550,000, rolling stock for our parks department. So because the Motorpool Fund funds all rolling stock, but not parks because it's related to the county. The county actually purchased the rolling stock and it's their asset, so we make a payment to them of our share of that replacement. So that's about $258,000 a year to upgrade the rolling stock at the Parks Department, and then we had play equipment of $75,000. So that is our 2019 projects. How we doing? Are we hanging in there? Okay. So, like I said, we could talk all day about TID districts, but, just to kind of give you kind of a status of the districts, the state law requires that we meet annually with the Joint Review Board. The Joint Review Board is made up of the finance director from the technical college, Roxanne, the finance director from the county, and the finance director from the school district, as well as a citizen member, and then we have a council member on the committee as well. So there's 5 members, and by law, we're required to have an annual meeting. That annual meeting must take place before July 1. We had ours on April 16th. So we meet with them and go over the financial condition of the districts. So they've already seen these slides. Basically, kind of looking at the districts and where we think they'll be in the future. So you can see, for example, in TID 3, right now it's showing that has a small deficit, and that deficit is projected to grow slightly, but by 2030, it will be paid off. By 2025, it should be relatively neutral. So it would be more in a break-even position by 2025. So its deficits are relatively short-lived. TID 5 I had in the presentation that I gave the Joint Review Board. This district we actually closed on March 10th, and so each one of the taxing jurisdictions will enjoy additional property taxes to use to balance their budgets in the 2021 budget cycle. So for the city, that equated to about $300,000 of new taxes that will no longer have to go to the TID district. So this district is now closed. TID 6, its expenditure period is ending May 10th of 2020, so coming up in a few days. Its closure is anticipated in 2025. So again, this would be a district that's getting ready to close within the next 5 years. This district has done a ton of infrastructure work for the city. The UK interchange, Thomas Street, 17th Avenue. It really has done quite a bit of infrastructure work for the city. Again, it will close in 2025. TID 7, we talked about today. Again, you can see that in 2022, I'm actually showing that it will have a slight profit. In 2022, about $400,000 when it terminates, because you're not allowed to, like, just levy a partial increment in any given year. You levy the full amount, even if it generates a small surplus. And then that surplus is shared by the other taxing jurisdictions. We do have some major developer payments coming up in that district, $525,000, which are related to improvements by the ears, nose, and throat, that area. But that is included, those obligations are included in my financial projections of the termination in 2022. You can see that our outstanding debt balance in this fund right now is only $168,000. So again, it is pretty much paid off its debt. It will pay that environmental fund for the improvements to for those street improvements over the next 2 years, and then it will be ready to go to close. TID 8, this is a relatively new district, and so it is still in its expenditure period. The projects that are underway in 2020 include the 18th Avenue Reconstruction. We had provided housing developer grants for the housing project that's located across the street from Triggs. The project plan amendment that we just adopted included incentives for the hotel. The mall loan is funded out of TID 8, as is a portion of First Avenue. So this district has done quite a bit of infrastructure improvements too, with sharing in TID 6. I didn't mention that. TID 6 also helped pay for First Avenue, portion of First Avenue. But TID 8 did Second Street reconstruction and First Avenue. So generally speaking, when the city has created districts, they have relatively sizable geographic boundaries, but Bull Falls was unique to the city because it's the only TID that we have that really looks at only one parcel. I mean, it was multiple, 4 parcels before Bull Falls did their improvements, but now it's 1 parcel. And so we funded basically developer payments to help Bull Falls do all of their expansion activities. We gave them a grant as well as a loan, so they're paying off that loan, and the city has debt, so our outstanding debt at December 31st was $240,000, and you can see that the increment from Big Bull Falls is not covering our debt payments, so our deficits have been growing, but they're very small. The deficit is only $200,000, and you can see that once we reach 2025, you'll see that at that point, the debt will be declining, and we'll actually see that those deficits recover. And my projections in 2029, which really aren't too far off in the future, that we will generate a surplus before it retires. So while it's showing a deficit now, I expect a surplus. TID 10 is in our business campus. Right now, it has a small deficit of $132,000. Again, this district is turning around and expected to start showing an increment in the very near future, and will most likely be able to retire early. TID 11 is our biggest business campus expansion. This now houses Great Lakes Cheese and Wausau Chemical. We have a small deficit, but that deficit is going to turn around very quickly, and we should be able to enter into a sustained period of operating in the black in that district going forward. So no big concerns with that district at this time. And then TID 12 is a new district. We just created this in 2017. So again, it's a little early to project a closure date for this. Its mandated closure date isn't until 2044, which I don't even want to think about how old I'm going to be then. But if I'm even, hopefully I'll still be above ground, but maybe not. I don't know. But anyhow, it's a long time. You know, we generally are managing our projects based on our capacity of the district. We do have some obligations out there for a skywalk for the Dudley Tower, which could be taken out of TID 3 as well. But we don't have any big projects scheduled in TID 12 currently, but right now it's continuing to show a deficit function. One of the things that we thought was going to be the saving grace in this was the Aspirus project, and that has been delayed for a couple of years. So hopefully, when that building gets built, that will help turn around that deficit.
Just a question also on that TID 12. Any development that happens on the North Riverfront, including the Karma Brewery, the Founders Restaurant, housing development that's planned, targeted at empty nesters near that old water plant, is that also
Yes.
to
so-
generate increment in number 12?
Yes, as is the housing that's being constructed right now by River Life LLC.
Those new condos?
The new, not the condos, but the apartments
Oh,
that are
the
up.
apartment building? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that increment is going to TID 12. So it, I'm not that familiar of where like that brewery is going to be. If it's on
They
the
wanted to
old Great
split up
Lakes
the
cheese.
GLC part,
Okay,
yes.
so that's only in TID 3.
Okay,
But Wausau Chemical's old building is in 12.
is in 12, okay.
Yes.
So there'll be a split there?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So the outstanding debt of the districts, just to kind of show you who's shouldering most of the burden of debt for the tax increment districts, TID 3 of 21 million, followed by TID 11 of 10 million. And again, TID 7 will be paid off in 2022, and TID 6 will be paid off in 2025. And then what our outstanding obligations to developers are currently. TID 3, we have a developers agreement with River Life LLC that requires us to make, I think it's a $100,000 developer payment in a reverse TIF. So when the increment is generated, we would basically give them a increment grant of $100,000. Our developer agreement with the Dudley Tower indicates that we will at some point build a skywalk between the Dudley Tower and a parking structure. Resurrection Church, we recently did some parking spaces for them, but we still have some green space and parking lot on the west side of that block to work on. TID 7, as I talked about earlier, we have a $525,000 increment grant that will be paid over the next 2 years. TID 8 for Sherrill, $230,000. That payment is about $57,000 annually. Also in TID 8, $601,000 of increment grant for the apartment building across from Triggs. Our forgivable loan for the mall of $1 million, and then the annual grant based on operating deficits. The Great Lakes Cheese, we have an increment grant of $6.4 million, which again is based on 50% of the increment they generate. And then Athletic Park for the, what do you call it? Like where the guys hang out. Clubhouse, yeah. 95,000. So looking at our expected terminations of our TID districts, again, TID 5, we closed in 2020. TID 7 will close in 2022. TID 6 will close in 2025. And then TID 9, not until 2030. So then you start seeing, some longer-term planning there. But they're all projected to close with, a small surplus or a break even. So I'm not right now looking at any concerns from cash flow perspective. So we're almost done. We do operate several of our funds as if they're businesses. So our enterprise funds, our wastewater and our water utility are a prime example where the fees that we charge our users are supposed to recover all of the costs associated with those activities. And we, of course, have some big projects coming up in both the wastewater and the water utility. So we have hired independent contractors to do the rate studies for us. And of course, for the water utility, the PSC really reviews our rate proposals to see that we're not unduly burdening the users. And we conducted our public hearing with the PSC last week, and so they will be forthcoming in approving the rate structure in the very near future. But you can see that, we do have some changes in our net position annually. Some of that is due when we make huge improvements, let's say when we did TID 11 and we did all of the underground work for the utility and paid for that out of the TID, as well as the water tower. They see a surge in their net income in that year because we've contributed those assets to them. I'm ready for the next slide. And then we have internal service funds, those funds that are billing other departments and trying to recover the costs of those activities. So we kind of talked about the motor pool. So you can see that the Motorpool Fund generated a net income or a net change in net assets of $521,000 in 2019, so they had a profit. But that profit included depreciation expense of almost $1 million. So when we look at what cash the motor pool actually generated, because depreciation is a non-cash expense, right? It's just the allocation of the assets over their useful life. So the cash that came in to the motor pool is $1.5 million. So we then take that cash that we've generated in that motor pool and we put it back to new equipment purchases. And we have a 5-year plan of what equipment or what vehicles or rolling stock we're going to be replacing. So in 2019, we invested in $1 million worth of new rolling stock. But that can vary from year to year because one year we might replace a large grader that has a huge cost, or like a pumper at the fire department, and it might be, a $600,000 piece of equipment that you don't need to replace the next year. So again, having the Motorpool Fund helps us manage that in the budget because the departments are paying for that replacement over time, and we don't need to go to the levy then each time to replace our rolling stock. The insurance fund is a similar situation, so it pays for all of our casualty insurance as well as our workers' comp, which we are self-funded for, and then we bill the departments back for their share of that casualty insurance. So you can see that while we saw a small loss in 2019 of $18,000, our fund balance has remained relatively stable. In our employee benefits fund, we were self-insured for dental and health insurance. For 2020, we actually moved to a fully insured plan for health insurance, but we do have reserves on hand of about $1.2 million in that employee benefit fund. Let's see what's left. And then other enterprise funds. So while we try to operate these like business, They do require some levy support. So those include Metro Ride, the parking fund, the airport fund, and animal control. So Metro Ride lost $481,000 in 2019, but $314,000 of it was depreciation. Depreciation is not an eligible cost for federal and state grants. So, you know, they did lose about $100,000 if you go beyond that depreciation. Our levy in 2019 was $830,000. We were up to $1 million in the 2020 levy. So the 2020 levy really increased our levy to Metro Ride. The parking fund you could see we were levying about $200,000. In 2018, we took a break on the levy. In 2019, we budgeted only $50,000. There was an additional contribution from the general fund of $200,000, so there was a slight profit at the end of the year of $174,000 in the parking fund. The airport fund lost $108,000. Depreciation expense was $150,000, so again, that 108 wasn't a total cash loss. The city has been trying to slowly increase our levy for the airport fund only because they're so asset-based. And as we talked about at the first council meeting of the new council, a lot of our hangars that the city owns are old, and our airport terminal building is old, and so we encounter a lot of maintenance costs to maintain those facilities, and it's hard oftentimes to anticipate, you know, what kind of maintenance is going to take place. But we have been trying to resolve the ongoing losses in that fund. So we saw another increase in the levy in 2020 for the airport fund.
Now, just a question on the airport fund. So the 2019 property tax levy at $101,000, that's a figure that we collect from the private hangar owners.
Some of that comes from, yes.
That build out there. So as new hangars develop, like the two for Casserk that we
Right.
were talking about, as that hangar area on the east side starts to fill up with private hangars, that should help us also take care of some of this
Yes.
shortage
Yes.
that we have. So the
Absolutely.
more private hangars we can get to put build out there, the
Right.
sooner the better.
Yep.
That will start to self-correct this without us infusing levy dollars.
Yes.
So that's
Exactly.
key.
And then animal control is the final one. The levy is about 50, in 2019 it was 40,000. This funds our animal control officer. Revenues from animal licenses go to this fund as well, but it does require some levy participation.
Does that fund also get fine revenue from animal citations?
Yeah, there's very few.
Some, like failure to license and the
Yeah.
late fees from the license and?
Yeah, late fees it gets, yep.
Okay.
And then finally, we do hold funds for others. Examples would be the Cemetery Trust Fund that's managed by Pine Grove Cemetery, and that's used for ongoing maintenance of the cemetery. The Entrepreneurial Center, we do the accounting for them, and so at the end of the year, we had about $178,000 of cash of the Entrepreneurial Centers. Wausau Events, we do the accounting for, and Main Street, we do the accounting for. So we had funds on hand for those agencies at the end of the year. So that is the presentation. Thanks for hanging in there.
That was a lot. And given that it was a presentation, we just placed that report on file. Going forward, our 2021 budget process and CIP process usually kicks off with CIP in July, right? July, August?
Yes,
So
I think there are plans for changing the CIP process this year. The forms are already out to the departments for completing, but I think
Okay.
there might be a change in the evaluation process this year.
Okay, so that said, that really is what kicks us off.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the departments submit their budgets for the mayor's review, then we start to see it in this committee in the early fall. And we
Yep.
have to be ratified by the first weekend of November, right, usually?
That's best, yes.
10th of November, so we can get our tax bills out on time. So we'll have a busy fall here. But any other questions? Does anyone have questions for Mary Ann? I know this was a lot to resolve, but if you have any, I guess, detailed questions for her about how a fund works, how we pay for stuff, how we fund it, how we borrow, what kind of bills we pay, she's always our go-to person for that. And I would recommend that you reach out to her anytime, because she's a wealth of information on that. So with that, we'll place her report on file, and we don't have anything else on our agenda, so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Herbst, is there a second? Second by Watson. And this one, we don't have to take a roll call. Members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. No one wants to stay all night? We're adjourned.